Mark Morris is a lawyer, legal expert, international business guy, and international man of mystery, and of course, a go-to for us here at TPL Media. Mark, thanks for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I'm glad to be back.
You know, it's interesting. We often talk about legal things and constitutional things, and sometimes even financial things. But this time, we have a little bit of a focus that I think is important to look at. We have had a lot of issues with tariffs, which was our last discussion with you, and Kuzma on the horizon. Will that get renegotiated? And in between those two, our prime minister has been all over the world doing some sort of business that seems to resemble us lining up with new allies. Do you think that Canada's repositioning with new allies around the world?
Well, look, anyone who says that there's not a change in circumstance since Trump got elected is defying reality. Clearly, Canadians have had a sea change in the way that they are perceiving themselves within the alliance structure that was the world. And a good portion of that is, of course, a reevaluation of the relationship with the States. But to be clear, it's somewhat of a pragmatic one, to my view. It's not people rejecting the fact that the United States are our brethren and that they are our closest ally and that we will one day again be friends and that at some point the current state of politics will be at an end and the traditional friendship that existed between Canada and the United States won't continue. I think people recognize that. But I think they also recognize what John Turner had to say during the free trade debates 20, 30 years ago, which is that overt dependence upon the United States to the exclusion of others makes us uniquely vulnerable within this globalized economy. And we are indeed experiencing that. I mean, at the end of the day, at the whim of one man, seemingly an unstoppable man because his party and the pillars of institutions that we have always understood the United States to possess are not stopping him from acting in ways that are somewhat lawless. Well, because of that, and because he's turned his attention on traditional allies, Canada, with its 70+% dependence upon the United States exporting and importing stuff, sees a unique vulnerability. And as a result, I think people are incredibly scared. And Carney, to his credit, has identified that weakness is something that can be buttressed by new allyship across the world, and has been seeking to establish that properly, in my view, over the course of the year that he has been in power. He's been recently rewarded with a majority government as a result.
Yeah, that was, and by the way, we're doing this podcast on the heels of that announcement last night. We have a majority government here in Canada, and Mark Carney, by and large, receiving a great deal of support, just had his Liberal convention, came off with barely a hitch, and he seems to be steaming ahead. You know, one of the questions I had was, this is sort of a question that relies on two parts to the answer. One of them is economically. We've had to find new trade partners. We've had to start to look within to see what it is we need to do as a country to start to compete. And then on the other side, we have NATO that is, a source of demand from Trump right now, and something that he seems very disinterested in overall.
Yeah, well, Trump has, if you ask me, and we'll see how this plays out, Trump loves to tell people he doesn't have the cards, because Trump was the person who kind of America was the place that held the world economy together. But unbeknownst to Trump and Vance and the like, they didn't hold the same cards that they thought. In fact, there's a lot of structural weaknesses if you undergird the fundamental pillars of the American system. Let me give you an example from Canada's perspective. If one just takes a look at the traditional Canadian-US relationship that existed during the Biden years, you would have seen a Canada that was wholly dependent. That is to say, 77% of our exports were going to the United States. And if you were a bully, and Trump, let's be very clear, is a bully, you would look at that and say, wow, there's something that I can put and exert pressure on. Surely they'll bend to my whims because they need me more than I need them. But underneath the surface, a very different reality exists. Canada, by not moving up the value chain, to be clear, Canada hasn't done a stellar job of moving up the value chain of manufacturing. That is to say, we still primarily produce raw components that we're pulling from the earth, oil, gas, minerals, potash, whatever it may be. We don't refine it. We just export it. Well, the thing about that type of export is that there are other players in this world economy that are far larger with consumer appetites than even the United States. And I'm thinking particularly of China, but others. And if all we're doing is exporting raw materials, and if those raw materials are somewhat unique to us, because they are, like we have an abundance of materials to the extent that others do not. Well, by tariffing Canada, what you do is you actually have Canada redirect to other markets. And those markets are more than willing to absorb Canadian product because there's always been a traditional need for it. We've just gone to the United States because it's cheaper due to transport. So a good example of that is the aluminum. I mean, after all, Quebec relies on aluminum and steel production because of its cheap hydroelectricity. When Trump went ahead and cut out the aluminum, Asia was all too happy to take over every single one of those contracts. And now that the aluminum cannot be produced in the United States because of power, because of minerals and everything else, they want it back. They can't have it back. Those contracts are gone. Canada's no worse off. The United States is significantly worse off. The same as with lumber. Trump takes a look at all the green and says, we have lumber too, but critically, they don't. They have very limited softwood lumber, whereas we have very plentiful softwood lumber. And softwood lumber matters because it's used for building. And if you cut off our softwood, Japan, Korea, China, everyone is ready to take these things. Yes, there's a bit of extra transport costs, but those transport costs pale in comparison to the tariffs that Trump chose to impose. And suddenly we found amongst ourselves in Canada that the weakness that we all thought that we may exhibit, we actually did not have to a significant degree. And you're seeing it in the job numbers. Yes, we've had one or two bad job reports, but overall, we've had massive job growth. Whereas in the United States, which has imposed tariffs, they have had negligible, if not terrible job growth, sometimes zero band. The Bureau of Labor Statistics out in the United States is now a manipulated entity, as are most government entities now in the States. Unfortunately, the rule of law there is reclining. And the way that they've done it is they always announce job statistics that are now massively revised downward 1 month later. And so everyone in the markets are learning to not actually absorb the Bureau of Labor Statistics when they first come out, but you have to wait a full month until you get to see the real statistics so it doesn't embarrass Trump and the administration. But if you take a look,
and I think it's also preloaded with other criteria that wasn't there before, and extrapolations being made.
They're manipulating data, but the true data is evident to everyone, and we can all see it, which is that their job market is in peril. Their inflation is going up. The fact that the gas inflation hasn't even kicked in because the Strait of Hormuz works by ships that basically go at the speed of a bicycle. And as a result, the oil transports that were coming to North America haven't even stopped yet. We haven't even experienced the decline. And gas is a full dollar higher than when Trump was elected. And remember, it's not about your cars. It's about the fact that petroleum is a raw input for almost every single thing that is created in the economy. And so it's going to have massive inflationary effects here as well, but there particularly. All of these factors are suggesting that America's perceived strength, where it thought it could outlast others, are actually a weakness, and that by removing itself from a global system, it actually is tangibly hurting itself and the rest of the global system, which continues to trade actually more fervently than ever with one another. China is trying to preserve. Iran is acting. Iran, the mullahs are acting as a guardian of sanity, sitting there saying, we're ready to keep the strait open to our friends who pay. Like, granted, you have to pay now, and now they're going to get billions and hundreds of billions of dollars as a result of this most recent action. But my point is, keeping the global trade system going, watching TPP being resurrected by Carney in Canada and trying to ultimately expand, watching Canada make trade deals with India, with China, with Korea, watching China sit there and say global trade is important. Everyone, you have predictability in us. We're watching the rest of the world continue on the track of increased globalization that America set out for 80 years. That America has course diverted doesn't mean that other people are following, and indeed other people aren't seemingly following. And so the pain that is being experienced in America may end up being, it's still too early to tell, may end up being a unique experiment in that country alone as the rest of us continue to prosper through free trade, which ultimately benefits everyone. That used to be a conservative precept, by the way. That used to be a conservative principle.
Mark, you kind of raise a point as you talk about the U.S. putting itself in a sort of isolated position at the moment, that it was meant to be a power play. We're in a position right now, I guess, as the rest of the world, to find allies. And we understand now at this very moment, it's come into clear focus that we are at war, and it's an economic situation. Yes, there are bombs being dropped and missiles being sent. But really what's at the heart of this is economics. We've seen the economic fallout from this. We are predicting what the economics are ahead of this. And now having allies means having trade partners. It's almost like where that used to be separate almost of one another. We see now how integral it is that we have allies that are also our trade partners.
It's interesting because trade has driven civilizational advance since the 1200s. The country that trades the most with the world becomes the world power. Now, the definition of trade can be rapacious, stealing everything from India and bringing it back to Great Britain. But the point is goods moving back and forth. Whichever country, the Dutch facilitated it through the Dutch East India Company. Right. The French facilitated it until Louis XVI. The British facilitated it throughout the 1800s. The Americans facilitated it and now we're seeing the rise of China, which frankly facilitates trade better than anyone else. To remove yourself from the system that has proven itself since the 1200s to be the source of global power is folly, and the Americans seem intent on relearning that lesson. Let me give you an example of the obvious benefits that America held prior to engaging in its current course of action. Because I know we're going to talk about NATO. People love to, and Trump particularly loves to say other people aren't paying their share when it comes to military and defense. And that is very true. Like, let's be very clear. We have massively underinvested in defense. In this country particularly, it's embarrassing. Canada's military tradition, just give a shout out to the veterans. Canada's military tradition is one of incredibly proud service, but also aptitude. In World War II, we were known as the premier fighting force pretty much of the world, largely because our land was untouched and we were able to build up our capacities in ways that Europe couldn't. But still, and this is true, by the way, when we fought as the British in 1812 on forward. We've always had a proud fighting tradition, and our veterans in Afghanistan and in Iraq, they did us proud. Like, even though we were massively underfunding our military at that point, they did us proud. We have a military tradition that we as Canadians should be very proud of, and by the way, should rebuild, because the military is actually very important.
Absolutely. And it's also, by the way, an amazing employment force. It's a great way to create national projects. It inspires us in many ways to do better around the world.
But this is my point. My point is that there was a trade-off that was made with the United States and all allied nations, which is, hey, America, you can provide your forces for everyone, and we in turn will use American military tech stacks. We will involve ourselves in the F-35. We will involve ourselves in the Patriot batteries. We will involve ourselves in what Trump wants to call the Golden Dome, whatever it is, doesn't matter. We will put our money into that so that we don't need to start from scratch, and we can use your platforms. By Trump's singular comment that one day they may not be so friendly, so we could turn off the F-35s, suddenly every single person realized that actually dependence upon the American military platforms are really problematic. And that's the reason that our spending has gone up from 0.8% of GDP to over 2%. It's because not only are we massively investing in actual guns, bombs, and everything else, and training, But we are now also creating the raw infrastructure that America basically provided as a sunk cost. And we have to build that up ourselves now. And so do every allied nation. So does France, so does Britain, so does Germany. We're all realizing that we need to spend money, but that money comes at a direct cost to the United States because we were subsidizing their military. Every person was subsidizing their military because the military in turn was subsidizing trade routes, global peace, and everything else. When Trump announced he's no longer going to do that job, when Trump said, "You're on your own, fellas," what he did was he gave everyone the incentive to ultimately say, well, that's fine, but if you're not going to provide the raw sunk costs, we now need to spend on our sunk costs. And that explains Carney's recent decision that, hey, 70% of our military spend was going to the United States, no more. Why? Because now, if America's not going to protect us, well, let's build our own economies. Let's build our own resources. We've done it before. We're very good at it. We're a military nation when we want to be, and we will be again. And that's being forced on us. But at the same time, it's something that provides unique opportunity at this time of day.
It's interesting that we are sitting here talking about the increase in defense spending, which came out in Carney's budget. By the way, he's suspended that budget and we're expecting a new one. But I wonder if that new budget will have an even larger increase in defense spending. And it makes me think to myself, okay, we're going to participate in NATO properly. Where are we getting this money from? I mean, the dollar is diminishing day over day. We're watching it right now. We are not really equipped to be building anything here in this country that, maybe some of the shipyards have the room, but apparently we're already outsourcing. It seems to me that we're going to be borrowing from Paul to beg from Peter later on. And I'm wondering, can we just keep printing money to satisfy NATO?
Yeah. So let me answer that. First off, I'm going to take umbrage with something you said, Mike.
Go right ahead.
Actually not falling. In fact, the Canadian dollar is showing massive resilience. And let me explain why. Right now, I just looked it up. It's 73 cents to the dollar, which, by the way, is a stable and traditional point for the Canadian US dollar at this time. But the reason that it's so impressive at 73 cents is because with the global uncertainty that's recently happened in Iran, the greenback still remains a point of security for the world. Massive amounts over the past 2 weeks of dollars have been flowing into the American dollar and bond market as security. And yet we're still maintaining a 73 cent. Usually we'd be at 69 cents during perilous times like this. We're at 73. You can expect that if the Strait of Hormuz somewhat cancels out, the stronger dollar that would result from us will be directly tied to the strong oil prices that are expected for the next 5 years as a result of Trump's actions. High oil prices, because Canada primarily exports raw materials and oil is a major component, directly affects our dollar. You'll remember the last time we were at par, the oil price was spiking. Our dollar is set for a pretty good run, and vis-a-vis other global currencies, we're really high. Vis-a-vis the United States still being the reserve currency is partaking in the benefit of massive global instability, and as a result, huge dollars are flowing in right now. I have a feeling that
I think, though, that our dollar is being propped up right now by the increase in oil per barrel.
It is
out of Alberta. And I wonder if, so, the U.S. has all of these options likely on oil moving forward. They're looking at Venezuela. They're, bullying their way around the world, trying to take whatever oil or make whatever oil deals they can. They're the biggest buyer of our raw product. I just wonder if what we're looking at, by the way, over the last couple of days is an increase in the dollar, but we were decidedly headed that way. And if the effects of this war haven't really taken effect yet, we might find ourselves there in as little as 30 days.
So first off, because we're only talking about the dollar now, you asked a whole bunch of other questions.
I don't know why we got on that. Sorry about that.
No problem. But first off, the dollar is directly reflective of the oil price because we're a petrodollar. That's what we are. I'd love to say that we're an economy of brains and brawn and manufacturing prowess and everything else, but we're actually 37 million people in an 8 billion person world, and all we have is land and resources, and so the petrodollar directly affects us. But it is expected that the petrodollar now will have, or the oil price will be spiked for a very long time. And when I say a very long time, I'm talking about several years, not several months, which means that given the reality of our dollar, given the reality of our dollar, we are simply put going to see a higher Canadian dollar as a result. Because again, the way it works is that in order to buy Canadian oil, you have to buy Canadian dollars because we then will sell it to you. And so that's what props up our dollar. Fine. As regards to the fact that the United States has other sources, who cares? Oil is a global price. It doesn't matter. If the market goes up...
Our price is based on Texas sweet crude, right?
It's based on Texas sweet crude, sure. But Texas sweet crude is in turn based on the global oil price.
Which is impacted by the... I got you, okay.
Right. And as a result, it doesn't really matter where the United States is getting their product from. China wants our product. So if we have to put it on a tanker and get it out there, great. People are still ready to pay the dollar value. Moreover, India is now desperate for our product because China's a bit different than India. China has, over the past 5-6 years, actually reduced, I'm not talking about reduced its growth in fossil fuels. Last year, it reduced its total fossil fuel consumption. And it was the second year it did that in a row. Look up the stats. It's very interesting. And the reason that they did that is because, don't get me wrong, they still are producing coal and they're still doing all their stuff, nuclear, but they are massively producing renewables. And they're not doing it because they're good people, by the way. Like, I want to be very clear about this. They're not sitting there singing Kumbaya, holding hands and saying, we care about the environment. I'd love if that was the case. Environment is my thing. That's not what's going on. What's going on is that they don't have domestic sources of fossil fuels outside of coal. And as a result, they see it as a source of strategic disadvantage and massive vulnerability. The reason that they've invested in solar the way that they've invested, and the reason that America doesn't give a shit about solar, is because America sees its future in fossil fuels because it has a lot of them. China, which has none of them, and by the way, has no water either, sees a much bigger problem. And it realizes that renewables are the only way forward through its security advantages. And it made that deal about 2011, 2012, when it massively invested in solar. The efficacy of full solar rose to 35% efficacy, which means every single electron of sun that comes from the sun, 35% of it is converted into electricity at the present time. And they've now been able to generate huge, huge, huge quantities to the point where they're no longer as dependent upon oil as they once were.
It's incredible. You see the fields that they've built. I mean, it's miles by miles, isn't it?
I pointed out to you the Tibetan field last spoke, and I told you there's a 500 square kilometer Tibetan field for solar that is generating I think it was 1 terawatt of energy, which is, by the way, the United States consumes 1.2 terawatts in total on a given year. And they're generating 1 terawatt. I mean, check my numbers because I'm not an energy expert, but I remember reading these numbers. They're just astounding, whatever they are. It doesn't matter.
So, Mark, but to this end, I mean...
My point is this. This. China's not dependent, but India hasn't made that transition yet. And neither has Brazil. And neither has a whole bunch of other countries. And all of them are massively dependent, and all of them need our product.
So on that note, do they then become allies of ours? And the reason that I ask this is because we're seeing what dependence on oil means around the world and how it impacts humanity. Do we start to sell to the Chinese market? Does that upset the U.S. when we're diverting and doing business with China when they would prefer that we don't? I mean, Trump has made it really clear that we shouldn't be doing as much business with China as we're doing. And I just wonder if our economic ties to other countries now will strain our relationship with the U.S.
Sure.
Meaning we've got new allies and we're upsetting our largest ally.
Sure. Well, first off, it's worth calling the kettle black. I mean, the United States, on a GDP basis, does far more trade with China than Canada does. Far more.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Like way more on a per person basis. They do way more. So for them to sit there and say you can't work with China is just the height of hypocrisy and can be pointed out in real time to them at all times. Yeah. But
it's shocking that they won't hear that, but
well, I mean,
it's true.
They don't want to hear what they don't want to hear, but it doesn't change the reality. The really interesting part here is your question. Okay, well, what formulates the basis for new friendships? And I'm going to go back to the 1200s. What formulates the basis for new friendships? Actually, it's not the 1200s. It was. It wasn't until free trade came about that trade itself became mutually beneficial. It wasn't beneficial for the Indian subcontinent that multiple, or for China, or for any of the conquered territories, that people came in, scrubbed their land clean of treasure and riches, and took it back to their country. That was trade. That wasn't beneficial trade.
Right.
Since free trade,
I think that was called plundering, but I could be wrong.
That was called plundering.
Yeah.
Since the advent of free trade, that benefits both sides. And I mean, there's classic economics that bears this out, and it's the whole thing that Trump doesn't want to understand. But the idea is that it's not a zero-sum game. Trade is something that can ultimately expand the pie, meaning that both parties benefit. A traditional conservative audience understands this very well. This is the whole basis of our global economy. And to that end, if you're asking where the new allyships will lead, all you need to really look at is where the growing trade routes are. Because where the growing trade routes are, there is more of a pie that both of us are eating from. And the more we both eat together, the more you sit together with someone and have dinner, the more friends you make. I mean, that's what it is. And the rest of the world is continuing to expand its pie. And the United States has decided to take its pie and go home. Okay, fine. So if you're wondering where our new traditional growing allies are going to be, I mean, no one in Canada is stupid enough to say the United States isn't going to be a massive part of our life forevermore. They will. In the same way, by the way, that someone who has 3 kids with someone and is getting a divorce cannot possibly say this person is not going to be part of my life. It's obviously going to be part of your life. That's it. You have to learn to live with it. You have to learn to deal with it. And to the extent that, by the way, that we're having perhaps a fight, we probably won't even end up divorced. We'll probably end up remembering that this was a poor time in our relationship, and we'll recover with better leadership and everything else. All of that's true. But in the interim, we're eating pie with other people, and we're developing new relationships. Some of those people that we're eating with and going on dates with are pretty sexy.
Yes. Tell me the sexy list of our current dates in your mind.
Well, let's just take the growing powers of this world. So there's a couple of growing powers. There's India, very clearly a growing power. Brazil, very clearly a growing power. China, very clearly a growing power. Those are the 3. And then I would add long term. Obviously, they're going through a bit of a rut, but the Middle Eastern countries of Saudi Arabia and the UAE and others are also equally powerful economic forces.
Now, those are trade allies. Do you see any sort of defensive allies out there that we are gravitating toward that we might not have before?
Yeah. And by the way, Mexico is also a growing power. Just as and that's very important because we have deep and abiding disputes and also trade with Mexico. So let's keep that in mind. Although it's not growing the same way China is and India is, but it's still growing significantly. So sorry, Mike, your question was?
Oh, yeah. These are good trade partners that we're developing, but are you starting to see any sort of defensive positioning that we might find in countries where we weren't hanging out before or teaming up with or aligning with?
Well, there's a very simple reason that we're aligning with the people we are, which happens to be in North Europe. There's actually 2 major reasons. One, the Arctic's about to open up. And we need to have Arctic security. It's the same reason that Trump was trying to go for Greenland. The Arctic is everything. Russia knows it, and they're now a dissipated force because of what has happened in the Ukraine. But so do the Arctic states, Finland, Norway, Sweden, Iceland, us. And so there's a natural affinity of interest that we have, given that we see the next 30 to 40 years worth of conflict resolving or really being over, establishing that new territory. Because really it is new territory, new routes, new transport, new trade. It's critical. Also, we have an affinity of cultural interest with most of the European countries. After all, we come from there. We have the same culture. We have the same beliefs. We have the same technologies, systems, understandings, languages. So obviously our natural tendency, if the Americans are out, is to bolster our European allies, who seem all too willing to do a bolstering. But more importantly, and this is not really known by many people, particularly those people who have only paid attention to military materials tangentially, one of the premier powers in this world, military powers in this world, is Ukraine. And people don't really appreciate it. But Iran's war is bringing it into sharp relief and focus. Look, Ukraine has 1/10 of the population of Russia. And they are now in a position where they are not losing a single piece of territory. Moreover, they're bombing the hell out of Russia, and Russia can't do anything back. That was the easy one. The fact is, the Americans sent over 2 aircraft carriers to Iran. Only one is there because it had a washroom malfunction. But actually, it was later revealed that Iran pummeled it with...
It had a fire on board. Yeah.
And now it's out of commission for 2 years.
Yeah.
That's the power of Ukraine's technology. It's not in advanced weaponry in the form of multi-million-dollar drones. It's in the massive scale up of cheap technology brought to bear. And Iran actually was really its counterparty, but it was beating Iran because Iran was supplying Russia. We were all supplying Ukraine. Ukraine has now built up this defense capability, and that defense capability is wanted by the whole world. The Americans are extremely angry at Saudi Arabia at the present time because Saudi Arabia just did a defense deal with Ukraine. Trump hates Ukraine. Trump's trying to do business in Russia, and so he's trying to undermine it and destroy Ukraine as a country. They were furious when they suddenly realized that Ukraine, not the United States, was being asked for and able to solicit Saudi money because Saudi Arabia looked at their defensive network and said, this is more valuable to us in today's economy. I don't need a Patriot missile battery, even though it's better, that costs $2 million. I need a drone that costs $3,000. And I need to be
that's an interesting point, because now you're not fighting missiles with you're not fighting wars with multi-million-dollar missiles. You're fighting them with drones. And I don't know if you know this, Mark, I've never told you this, but I have a warehouse. Do you know how many drones I can fit in my warehouse? 2,000. And I have 6 warehouses.
Okay, exactly. And, I had a meeting. So I ran a podcast for a bit, and I do writing and podcasts. And one of the guests on that I had was General Ben Hodges, who was commander of the Eastern European the American command in Europe. And we had a big discussion about asymmetric warfare, because that's what this is. And asymmetric warfare is the idea that America, you can invest trillions of dollars, but trillions of dollars is something that becomes a vulnerability when you invest that much, if you can take it out with 5,000. And so if you're asking where our natural military allyship is, both because of culture and because of the geography of situation, but above all else, because they are now the premier exporter of the defense that the world needs, it's Europe. It's clearly Europe. China is learning from Europe. India is learning from Europe. The people are not trying to buy Russian technology is totally discredited. It's always been a joke, but it's been proven to be a joke. No one buys from Russia. American technology is now discredited because of political leadership, where Trump has basically said we can cut you off at any time. Well, because these tech stacks cost billions of dollars, you don't invest in something where someone is erratic and ultimately can cut you off at the push of a button. So who do you invest in? Well, you invest in someone who is proving that they have a technology that is cheap, easily deployed, and that fundamentally can't be controlled through centralized means, and that avails itself incredibly well to artificial intelligence. Swarms of drones can be controlled through artificial intelligence. And this is the new reality that we face. So if you're asking where our defensive posture is, I think anyone, both in the military, for the economy, and for our culture, everyone looks to Europe first and foremost. Then secondary is
I was going to say, and beyond that, it seems like we're developing relations in Japan, South Korea, China.
Right. Well, the reason that those guys are militarily important is because they see benefit in the status quo. So it's not that they have the same culture or understanding or desires, but what they do have a desire to keep doing is global trade has been very good to China. It joined the WTO in 2001. Look at what it is now. It wants to keep this system going. And more importantly, it will use force to protect it. There's a reason it hasn't attacked Taiwan recently. It may still. I don't think it will. I think it's just personally, I think Taiwan's, even though Trump is there and Trump won't raise a finger to help Taiwan, China has not chosen to attack Taiwan. And I think the reason for that is because it just keeps growing stronger and stronger and stronger. And perhaps the best way to take over Taiwan, TSMC and everything else, is just to build out your economy such that you're better. And then at that point, taking them over becomes a non-issue. The reason we're all freaking out is because they produce the NVIDIA chips and they produce all the other chips that
exactly.
Well, China's massively investing in lithography. They're expecting to get ahead of the game. Like they have the power to produce for the chips. All of these things. Anyways, the point is,
Mark, you just raised a good point. We spend our existence intimidated by the U.S. Will they do trade with us? Will they protect us? Will they take us over? That wouldn't be in question if we just got better.
Right, exactly. And look, to some degree, Canada can't become the United. Let's be honest. Like we're 37 million. They're 400 million. Like at some point, there is a structural limitation to becoming a global power the way the United States is. But it doesn't take away from your point, which is Canada can be way better than it is. Canada can invest.
Yeah, I mean, it can put ourselves in a position where the status quo is that they find us mutually beneficial, that we're not viewed as a drain on their economy, that we're productive in supplying things to the world that are desirable to them.
Right. Well, I mean, strangely, the Americans that are actually in business and not in graft understand that we are all those things. I mean, Canada is massively those things for the United States. We are a huge benefit to the United States to the point where we are impeding our own growth because we just give our raw materials to them and then we become a consumer economy where we buy out their finished products. I mean, we can do better. We can do better.
You know what, Mark? I want you to be part of my new team. I'm going to start a company called Petro-Canada, and we're going to make petroleum for our own nation. What do you think?
I think it's a great idea. And then I think we should ultimately sell it to private interests at some point in the turn of a government. And then we can all lament what we've lost.
Oh, you know what? Let's learn from our lessons previously. Mark Morris, thanks. I really appreciate you doing this on short notice. You're the guy that we turn to, and I hope that you'll be around more as we dissect what's going on around the world because you're out there. Your next trip is Madagascar. You are in Asia. You're the guy that we know that has more air miles than anybody else on our team. So thank you. I appreciate you for being here.
I want to be clear. That's not for business. That's because King Julian's theme song from the Madagascar thing, I have young kids, played in my ear forever. I'm going to go find that lemur. I'm going to go kick him in the rear, and I'm going to take my vengeance. That's the reason. That's the reason for Madagascar.
I understand. I got Lion King on my list. All right. Thank you, my man.
My best. Take care, Mike.
Patriotic means looking out for each other and fixing things together.
True patriotism is being in the country you love, surrounded by people you love, and great weather.
Being a patriot is being a part of your community and caring for it.
It doesn't matter who you are or where you're from. Patriotism is the one thing we all share.
It's okay to be critical of government and still be a patriot.
It's gratitude to your country.
Of course I'm a patriot. I'm Canadian. It's my home.
Well, actually, true patriot love is the mission.